I won't ask again. The words echo through the metal shipping container, lined with a grime-coated plastic for easy cleaning. Despite this, it hadn't been cleaned since it was first placed down, over 5 years ago. Lined with grime, gore, and filth, it added to the dread ambience we wished to achieve. It contained the sin we wished to conceal from the world, but mostly from ourselves. Only a defiant stutter came from the middle-aged man, stripped to the waist, chained to a chair, with dark red-purple bruises where he had pulled on them. His body's attempt to preserve his life, coated in a filthy layer of sweat, and his chest heaving rapidly, a low grunt from his lips. He didn't want to tell us, and it had taken days to get this far with him. There were several burn marks on his body, some old white lines, and others fresh, pink or red, with a foul-odored puddle beneath him that none of us concerned ourselves too much about, coupled with the scent of fresh and dried blood, body odor, and burnt skin. The bloodied potato sack we had placed over his head used to hide our location when we first seized him. It now rested on the floor. The broken prisoner stared up at me with his remaining blue eye, lined with a black-blue bruise. Then his chin dropped. It touched his chest, with a long line of saliva and blood trailing from his lips. 2 men flanked me on either side, as I sat on the edge of a table with a tray of various torture instruments. Some had an innocent past, while others were designed for this purpose. A variety of carving knives, old medical and dental supplies. Each piece still retained blood from the previous victim, who died keeping her mouth shut. 2 sets of teeth, roots and all, had been plucked, and were left there along with all of his fingernails, and toenails to match the set. A blood pool on the ground leading outside was the only physical remnant she had ever existed. He was on the brink. I could tell. I raised my hand, indicating it was time for a momentary reprieve. He groaned, twisting his body, and murmured ill-fated threats under his breath, knowing full well they would never come to pass. Both men had been with me for some time, with his dark hair tied back with flecks of grey and a beard. Jack stood with a knife in one hand, while the other, Adrian, shorter and slender, had a sizzling hot poker in his, still with the remnant of burnt skin clinging to it. It was placed on the prisoner's shoulder, allowing it to sizzle on living flesh. All that was achieved was a scream and a venomous promise to do us harm. In another life, one could assume we were related. All of us have similar facial features, yet no blood ties. The 3 of us wore jeans with boots and a plaid shirt, functional for our new occupation. I gave Jack a solemn sideward glance, then inclined my head. The knife wrapped around his pointer finger, pushing down, and with a loud cry and a crunch, the finger fell to the floor with a spurt of blood. 2 snarling Belgian Malinois dogs fought over the piece and gobbled it up. It snapped easily in their mouths. I watched, not blinking nor shying away at the sight. His animalistic screech had turned into mindless babble.
Artemis! Apollo! Heal!
Came the sharp command from Adrian, and the large dogs pulled back obediently, sitting on either side of him, panting with their tongues out, their tan muzzles flecked with blood, staring up at him for any further orders, obedient.
Please. Please. I don't know anything.
The plea came from the broken captive, a hollow weep at the back of his throat, and he wept, trembling, and an unspoken confirmation was given. I couldn't remember his name. He, and we all knew, he wouldn't leave this room alive. I understood why he didn't want to tell us. If any of us were in that chair, we'd do anything to preserve the lives of the rest of our group. Our family beyond blood.
If I tell you, will you let me live?
His desperate eyes darted from one to another, finding only an assured silence.
Will you let my family get out alive?
We used silence as a weapon. If we allowed him to live, it was likely his own people would kill him. Or they would hunt us down. Or infection from untreated wounds would allow him to perish. An easy death would be a mercy. If, I began, my voice soft, perhaps with a hint of compassion. If you tell us, there'll be minimal bloodshed. I'll ensure only soldiers are killed. The rain continued its loud banging on the roof, and coupled with the heavy pants of the two dogs, the chill in the air, the pain, all causing him to shiver. I never lifted a hand against any of the prisoners. I ignored Adrian's idle sway, and he knew the truth, yet he was not as well versed at hiding it. Jack's gaze remained steady, neutral, and I knew I could rely on him.
Do you promise?
He asked, soul-eyed wide in blind-sided hope. It darted from side to side, trying to find sanctuary among one of us, trying to think of the best possible option. I promise.
If you attack from the northern side, the guards switch over at noon.
He stopped, face lowered in shame, knowing his betrayal. Jack's hand squeezed the knife. The subtle threat was effective.
If you attack then, you'll find a way in, under the drain, on this coming Saturday. It is Vox's birthday. To be drunk, distracted. You'll be able to slip in unnoticed.
We knew where he meant. Vaughn, a leader we had fought many times before. Neither side strong enough to destroy the other, ending with a bloody stalemate. We kept fighting over resources, both of us having lost members of our group. Adrian tensed visibly at the mention of Vaughn's name, causing the dogs to stand and growl, only to sit down once more. I figured it was the memory of his brother's murder stirring in his mind. And using my foot, I tapped him to remind him where we were, here in the now. Showing weakness in front of a captive was never good. There were a great deal of ifs and trust placed in our prisoner. Desperate men either told the truth or wished to die, misleading their enemies. Narrowing my eyes, I watched and waited with my arms folded. The question of keeping him alive remained. I cast Jack and Adrian a glance, then gestured in the direction of the door, before the three of us moved to stand near the exit. A low whine coming from either of the dogs, as their claws tapped on the floor. Outside, the downpour of rain rattled the surface of the shipping container.
I don't think we'll get more out of him, and he's the last.
Jack murmured down to us, back to the broken prisoner, then returning it. We had been too careless with the previous two, before they perished.
We can do our own scouting, see if he's telling the truth.
We'll be going in blind. I don't trust him.
Adrian added, a stray hair coming down his forehead, reaching down to ruffle the head of Artemis. We found him as a child, with his now dead brother with a pair of puppies. The corpses of his parents in a car. It took them years before they spoke to us. having preferred the company of their canine companions. The dogs' heavy breathing, with condensation rising from their mouths, with Apollo standing and sitting himself back down.
I think we should kill him.
The whisper was harsh, irritated. I was now faced with a dilemma. Kept alive, he would be a hostage. Yet there was always a chance his limited knowledge of our base being used against us. Thus far, our home hadn't been discovered. Yet. And we hoped to keep it that way. Still, he was our last prisoner. Keep him alive. For now. We could use him, I whispered, then nodded in the direction of the door, and the younger one took the command. Adrian leashed both dogs, opened up the door with a loud creak, and the flood of moisture poured inside. The grey sky and heavy rain poured down. He left to take his favored pair outside, into the elements to wash, dry, feed, and otherwise care for them. Jack and I watched him fondly. It had been several years since we first found him on the road, and took him and his brother in, raising him as one of our unofficial children, one of 7, the last to survive. We turned back to the captive, whose head hung limp and body strained on the chains. Jack exhaled stoically, approached him, and placed 2 fingers on his neck to check for a pulse. Silently, I hoped the prisoner was still alive. There was information we could have extracted from him. He shrugged.
This one's dead.
And called out, nonchalantly, reaching into his pocket for the key and unlocked the padlock. I couldn't remember his name anymore, either due to not wishing to, or a lack of care. Fuck. I doubt we'll get a chance to get another. Any idea what finally did him in? With an irritated sigh, I unwrapped the chains from around him, dropping them on the floor with a loud clanking sound, allowing the corpse to fall face first onto the concrete, leaving a fresh, bloody pile behind.
Heart attack, I'm guessing. Won't know unless I cut him open.
We'll dispose of him tomorrow, I said, stepping outside into the downpour. The sky was grey, the water coming down at an angle, and barely a shadow of the forested hills in the distance. In isolation, we found security in an abandoned farm we took over. There was room for chickens, pigs, and goats, but otherwise any vegetables had to be grown in the greenhouse. The old farmhouse served as a family home. Walking toward it and hearing the door close behind me, I knew Jack was one step behind. We went into the mudroom to remove the muddy and bloody clothing from our bodies, placing them in the large sink, and washing ourselves in what had been a dog wash bath, large enough for us both, and content in our mutual nudity, having fallen into each other's company not long after the world fell into decline. We washed ourselves. Once we freshened up, we put clean clothes on and rinsed out a majority of the mud out of our clothing before hanging them up, leaving them to dry, closing the front door, locking it with a click, and bolting it behind us before putting up the makeshift barricade, bookshelves, vanities, anything, all part of our usual routine. We need to double check to make sure. I don't like how the dogs were barking last night.
Soon.
We entered the well-worn, country-style kitchen with a circular wooden table surrounded by 5 chairs in the center. A large pot with steam rising from it. After being out in the wet and cold, it was a gift to eat something warm. I peered inside. The questionable meat no longer stirred my stomach and caused my mouth to salivate. "Come on! We'll eat and get back to work," I called out to them. The 4 men who had become close to. "Ernie, any news?" He let out a grumble. the eye patch covering his left eye. A scar down the same side of his face kept the skin taut, unnaturally so. He walked with a distinct limp and was the unofficial old grandpa of the group. He was lucky to survive the injury years ago with the lack of medical care from the old world. Sitting down, he helped himself to the food, straight from the pot, characteristically ignoring any attempt of conversation from us. No news meant good news.
Oh, yum.
Jack said, sitting down, and other than bowls and spoons, the table was completely bare. One of the few times we weren't carrying weapons all the time. Adrian was placing some into 2 bowls by the pantry door for the 2 dogs. Footsteps came through the building as Brett returned, his face partially covered by a balaclava, and placed his rifle by the doorframe. He gave us a terse nod of greeting before sitting down, helping himself to the food, and after a mouthful,
"The border looked like someone passed through some time ago."
Brett commented, not looking up from his bowl, then stopped to look at me.
"We really need to get the radios fixed."
He wasn't wrong. "Are you sure they're not around now?" He shook his head. Ernie nodded and gave a grunt in agreement, his mouth still filled with food.
Matter of parts. When we go on the next run, we should get them then.
Jack added concerning the radios. Whoever was in that group wouldn't be able to contact the rest until they returned. There was always the risk of it being Vaughn's or another group, scouting for resources. We'll go the day after tomorrow. Ernie stood, grumbling, and headed back out to the shed. The silly old coot was the reason we survived in the first place. Back when Jack and I were feral, I could hear the sound of the bullet press as he was back to work, a noise we only stopped hearing when replaced by his snoring. So, winter will be coming in a couple of weeks.
So, more supply runs?
Our code word for a raid.
If we don't, it shouldn't matter. We have supplies to last for a while.
Always good to have more.
We'd survived thus far. I poured some water, then pushed the jug toward Jack, who poured his own and passed it along the line.
I enjoy a good raid, though.
We laughed. I noticed Adrian's focus was elsewhere other than the conversation. It wasn't strange, since he preferred to be by himself. He looked past us, and when I heard Artemis's claws tapping on the wood floor, down the hallway, she stood near the barricaded front door. She sniffed it and I stood, walking slowly, and peered around the corner at her. She was staring, not barking, and her back arched upward with a long defensive growl. This was unlike her. I took 2 steps backward to see Jack had come to see what had happened. "Tell everyone to arm themselves," I ordered him, gestured at the door, and opened the cupboard nearby, taking out a loaded assault rifle. I aimed it at the door and heard Jack walk back to the others. A strange loud click echoed, and a bright light cast over the windows. It was blinding. The loud electronic sound shot through our ears, and closing our eyes instinctively, Artemis started to growl, and Adrian whistled, calling her away. She crept toward him, waiting for orders. I dropped down, crawling on my elbows to escape, and head in the direction of the armory. I didn't need to shout. The others knew to stay away from the windows, and sure enough, a barrage of bullets blast at the front door and the windows, sending fragments of wood, glass, and light bursting in from all sides. I covered my ears. Given the sheer wastage of ammunition, I wondered about the size of their arsenal. A long, loud siren blasted through the farmhouse, causing the dogs to yelp and their barking to become erratic. I accidentally struck the wall, attempting to find my way toward the others. I couldn't help but cover my ears. My senses felt like they were no longer my own. I couldn't see the others, but guessed they were doing the same. The front doors were struck with something large. Once, twice, and again. I didn't wait to see what they used. Grasping my rifle, I reached out and felt Adrian's shoulder, giving him a smack. While we couldn't prepare for this exact event, each of us had become well acquainted with the farmhouse. And when we got to the kitchen, we heard the front door finally break open. Whoever they were well organized and well equipped. Jack already had the cellar hatch open and waited ready to strike. The two dogs were brought below, with Ernie and Brett covering the escape. The back door, while defended, was also being struck with a battering ram to grant entry. A light flickered down below in the cellar, with Jack holding Artemis, while Adrian held Apollo. As Brett climbed down the ladder, it was only a matter of time before they'd find us. "Quickly! Get out! We don't have much time." I hated the idea of sacrificing Ernie, and the sound of screams and gunfire told me they'd entered. He gave a loud scream of victory, fired his gun, emptied his mag, before a deadly scream echoed throughout the farmhouse. The hatch closed, and Jack destroyed the wooden ladder, breaking it into pieces. Moving past the rusty shelves filled with jars, we knew the way from memory, and the repeated drills, and traveled down the dark passageway. It had taken us considerable time to gather all of our resources, and now losing them was difficult to think about. We made our way at a steady jog, step by step, and hoped they hadn't found the exit. By the time the cellar door opened, it was dawn, the sun peeking over the horizon, and we stayed hidden. We crept out to the nearby hill to get a vantage point, but that didn't mean they weren't still around. Finding the cache of supplies we kept hidden in the side of a hill in case of emergencies. Guns, ammunition, food to survive the journey.
Quick, take what you need.
We expected to find them there still, only to see the farmhouse. The greenhouse was burnt and destroyed, while only one of the two barns, where we kept our old farm animals, still stood. Ernie's head was on a spike, and on display as a warning. It was greeted with building rage. We had seen and done worse things to our enemies previously, yet seeing this happen to one of ours made our blood boil.
Who were they?
He hissed.
I don't know. We need more information.
Brett peered through the scope of his sniper rifle, waiting.
There are tire tracks down the road.
How many?
2, maybe 3. Some type of jeep.
Any indicator about who they are? The terrifying part was, no group we experienced had the items they did. They moved like shadows. Having working vehicles was rare, as was fuel and ammunition. Their silence gave me the answer. Brett and Adrian took either dog. They walked between their legs and sat when they stood. Occasionally either man would give them a hand signal. However, the closer we got to the building, they refused the order, and we gave each other a questioning glance. The dogs whimpered, moving back, and no doubt were warning us. Neither had ever refused before. In early daylight, whoever they were had disappeared. We entered the house through the fractured front door, left wide open and off their hinges. large splinters where the battering ram had made their way inside. Jack led the way, moving silently with our rifles drawn, and being careful in case there were any traps. It had been looted. The weapons and ammunition had all been taken. Even the bullet presses were now lost to us. A whistle came from the walk-in pantry, and I walked in to see a puzzled-looking Jack. I gave him a questioning look, and he pointed to the still stocked shelves. There were large containers of water on the lower levels, and shelves were filled with supplies, tin cans, boxes, and other goods. All were valuable. I opened the medical crate. It too was left untouched. No one would risk leaving all of these valuable items. We found the remains of Ernie. I don't know what could have done something like this. None of us shied away from death nor the dead. He was in pieces, dried blood on the floor, while fresh dribbled down from the ceiling. His severed feet and hands spread apart. Those missing eyes were placed in the center, and coupled with an open rib cage. There wasn't much left of him to worry about. Jack picked up one of the hands. 2 tips of the fingers were missing, and turned it to the side and showed me the edge. It was jagged and torn. He was about to toss it back down when something caught my eye. I grabbed it and pulled out what resembled a tooth, holding at my fingers. It wasn't human. I could feel my eyes grow wide, giving him a questioning glance, only for him to return the gesture. I took the tooth and placed it inside my pocket. His eyes narrowed. A silent agreement of discretion passed between us, and we continued. I gave a sweeping motion underhand and signaled for us to move forward. Leading the way, we went out the back door that too had been destroyed. Gentle sunlight peered down on us, in sharp contrast to yesterday's weather. Once outside, I decided to check the barns, since our inspection of the house brought no answers. We had a few goats, nothing special, and unless they were grazing, we kept them inside, out of sight and out of mind. After pointing to Brett and Adrian, and then to the surrounding area, the pair nodded and gave a quick thumbs up. Now they and the dogs started scouting the local area and ensured the perimeter was secure. We'd meet back at the supply crate before we'd decide what was best. Depending on the news, we'd either stay and rebuild, or we'd try to find a new place to seek shelter at. We approached the remaining barns. The one on the left hand had been burnt, with embers still burning, and the telltale aroma of thick, charred air. Peeking through the planks, I saw all the goats had been drained of blood. And worse, they hung from the rafters. All the smoke in the air. The sound of movement caused us to jump, and we realized it came from the other barn. Adrian whistled, letting us know the way was clear. I thought for a second Jack was going to call out, and I smacked him with the butt of my rifle to remind him to shut up. I gestured back to the supply crate, and Jack put up his hand and looked through the hole, a gap in the wood, allowing him to see inside. His body still, eyes locked on something, and he froze, uncharacteristically. Leaning closer, he tried to get a better look at whatever was in there. I don't know what he saw. Suddenly he jerked back, indicating with his hand for us to get out of there, and in the brief flash, his face had gone white, clearly torn between fight and flight.
We need to go. Now.
Jack whisper shouted, then started on his way. I followed him, unsure what it was, but not wasting any time. There were 3 shots in the distance, each from Brett's sniper rifle, and 7 from Adrian's rifle. We heard howls and barking, We made haste, and unwilling to lose more of our ranks, we ran toward the sounds, weapons ready to fire. The open crate was covered in blood, and we came across Adrian, crouched over the body of one of the dogs, Artemis. She was on the ground, legs trembling and frozen in fear, a wound at her throat and chest, no doubt where she had been attacked. "What happened? Did you see them?" I demanded sharply.
I could barely see them.
Adrian's whisper responded. "Adrian! Numbers! Info! What were they armed with?"
They took him. Apollo. I was just able to save her. She'll make it. I promise.
I doubted she would make it much longer, especially so during the night.
Adrian,
Jack placed a supportive hand on his shoulder.
what did you see?
They were so fast. They were people. They bit. Scratched at us.
Jack and I gave each other a look. We dealt with people who'd gone feral in the past, becoming debased and animalistic in nature. Dusk was approaching, and in the surrounding forest, there were increasing shadows. It was too silent, and I didn't like how we were exposed. I jumped when I heard something from inside the cellar below. Staring down, I saw nothing, yet was sufficiently creeped out. "It's time to go," I insisted.
No. The bleeding is stopping.
Adrian pressed on the wound. We saw her heartbeat grow weak. Jack knelt down beside her, stroked her head softly, while I looked around at the terrain, seeing no movement, yet I was on edge. I had a feeling we were being watched.
I promise it'll be quick.
They came out of the tunnel in a blur, and from all around us. The dread snarl encircled us, as each of us were knocked to the ground. I couldn't see their fates. Instead, I was on my back, using my rifle to hold off the man, who was grinning wildly down at me, with fangs showing. He pushed the rifle down on my neck. I took an inward breath while it pressed on me, suffocating me. "Help me," I murmured, my focus solely on my death. Smoke grenades were thrown, and soon, whatever air I got only made the process go quicker. I kicked out at him, choking, and I wondered why the smoke wasn't impacting him too. It faded away to black. In a daze, yanking my arms to realize they were bound behind my back, I swayed and I wheezed from the impact of the smoke. It burned my lungs. I saw 3 of them, barely seeing their silhouettes, shadows hovering over us, and my eyes started to clear. When they were done, I realized we were in the shipping container. It was still filled with smoke, yet they weren't hurt by it. "Why? What?" I whispered.
"We found you because of all the blood."
A dark purr came from her lips, and now close I could see them. She had red hair flecked with grey, and stood barely at 5 foot. None wore gas masks to protect themselves from the smoke. No wonder they wanted us alive. We were their prey. I looked around the shipping container, vomiting in my mouth, knowing my fate would be the same as many who came here. "Who are you?" I demanded. She didn't answer me. We were all bound, arms behind our backs, and only the 3 of us remained. Adrian's body was flopped on the wall. Head rested on one side, with his neck exposed, with 2 distinct fang marks with a trail of fresh blood. I heard Jack's shallow whimper, lingering, and behind her, I saw him, strapped to that same chair so many people had been in. His shirt was pulled open, and he had multiple bite marks all over his body. One on his neck, one on the inside of his arm, on his shoulder, and each were barely bleeding. What on earth? I knew he still lived by his breathing and erratic heartbeat.
Now,
I saw her eyes light up, and her fangs showed.
do you want to join us or die?
The question hung in the air. I peered outside to see their human cattle. They stuck close by to keep the cold out. The younger or favored members on the inside, while the outside had the outcasts, the sickly, who had to endure the sharp bite of the growing cold. They were naked, a red brand on their left flank, no doubt from a cattle iron, and I shuddered at the thought. They didn't speak nor call out. Given our dietary habits, being predatory toward our fellow human beings was not unheard of for us. The guards surrounding them had cattle prods rather than rifles. Their faces and skin always covered to protect them from the sun's rays. I hoped never to become one of their cattle. I'll be what you are. I relented, and her teeth sank into my neck. I screamed, squirming until I felt one bite after another. Nameless vampires joined in the feasting. The pain was indescribable. My heart ached and every vein pinched and pulled while I was drained of blood. I thought my heart was going to give out. The change was different. I woke up, ravenous, and realized Jack, Adrian, and I were locked inside that shipping container, in the dark. Except, I could now see where I was. The door opened as a burst of sunlight sent us back, covering our faces to prevent the rays from torching our skin, and another was added. A man, bound with his arms behind his back, was pushed inside. The door slammed behind him. He was gagged, and the three of us held off, unwilling to take the first step. An internal, unholy scream told us to feed, and we lunged at him, feeding only for him to be pulled out, still alive and bleeding. Collectively, we lunged at him, starving, and now with a taste of blood, we only crave more. They had to kick us away and slammed it again.
Welcome to my family, my loves. It seems you have pulled through.
This time, we were given clothing matching theirs. Pseudo-military gear, no doubt looted from the army and mixed with whatever they could find. It turned out, we did go and raid Vaughn's settlement after all. It was a success, and we spared no one. Those that were not killed in the initial attack were selected to become cattle or join their ranks. Her, our mother, her decisions and reasoning was never disclosed to me. Human cattle were selected through good health, herded into buildings, and only fed scraps in whatever troughs we could find. Brett, instead of becoming one of us, chose to remain as a mortal. I thought they were going to kill him, yet instead, his tongue was ripped out, his pointer finger sliced off, and his hamstrings cut to limit his mobility. He was led toward and soon absorbed by the herd of humans. All that came from them were sad cries, and over time, they became more beast-like, shunning the cold whenever another was added to their ranks. They made animalistic grunting sounds, or squealed whenever we got too close. I had to acknowledge that he was no longer one of us. I remembered trying to speak to Brett right before the dawn when the others hid underground, and a rare moment where we could be alone, asking him if he wanted me to kill him and to apologize. All he did was cower away from me, scared to look at me, waiting for me to attack, and I realized he was more animal than human. The broken shadow of a man as he defecated on the ground, stepping in it and struggling to get back to the center. I wrinkled my nose in disgust, more so at myself. We stayed in the farmhouse, no longer our home, with our greater family. And finally, the local area had been cleared of humans, and thus our journey began. We got in one of the jeeps. The memories of what happened, the events that led to us turning now, nothing but a faded memory. Adrian didn't speak anymore, unable to remember his constant canine companions, yet the hole they left couldn't be filled. I stared out into the wilderness when we drove away, and saw the two dogs, Artemis and Apollo. Their eyes glowed, and they too had changed. We truly had become the ones God forgot. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.